Welcome to a special On the Tape podcast, Dan. You know why it's special?
Tell me.
Because we have Ron Biscardi, the founder and CEO of iConnections, along with Kaitlin Malin, the COO of iConnections, in the office with us right now.
That is very special. I didn't mean to be glib about that.
No, you meant
Hey,
to be a
guys,
little bit
thanks
glib.
for being here.
And very excited,
It's like
guys.
returning to the On the Tape podcast.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
super exciting.
It is exciting.
Thank you for having us.
Are you kidding me? A lot of exciting things going on at iConnections. Now, you're coming off a conference in the Far East. Are you allowed to say that still?
I think you are, yes.
Yeah, well, that's
We can
where
go
you
with it.
were. So let's start with that. That was a huge and very successful conference, Kaitlin.
Yeah, absolutely. I was there on the ground. It's grown. This is our third year in Singapore, and the event basically doubled in size from last year. So we had 230 fund managers and basically the same number of allocators as well. And in the end, we did over 3,000 meetings. So huge success. Definitely seeing a lot of interest in our format, the one-on-one meetings, the cap intro. It continues to grow. Our brand is definitely solidified there. We saw, the split between allocators that were based in the US and Europe relative to Asia. The Asia-based numbers continued to grow. There's close to 80% of the LPs there that were in the APAC region, and another 20 from, like I said, US and Europe. So really strong turnout. Super excited.
Which is remarkable. And we're going to talk about, obviously, the one that we will all be at in Miami Beach at the end of January. But talk about that growth. And then next year, what do you think, what type of growth do you expect? Because the proof of concept is clearly there in terms of this business.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating about what we do with the Cap Intro event is that you really get a snapshot in all of the different regions in terms of what is interesting from a strategy perspective. The meetings that the LPs take are a reflection of what's likely to come in flows in the next 2 to 3 years from there, if not sooner. So this year in Asia, we saw that event-driven was strongly represented. Global macro funds, not surprisingly, just given what's going on broadly and geopolitically, and then also multi-strats, which I feel like is not that surprising. But to me, what'll be interesting is looking at that and then seeing how it changes relative to Miami, where it's not as much. Like I said, 80% of the attendees were APAC based, so it may skew that.
So, Ron, you're sitting here hearing Kaitlin talk about that conference. When you started this, your vision many, many years ago, in your wildest dreams, did you think you get the kind of numbers you get? Now, I'm teeing you up with that question, I know, but, you have a vision, but then when you see it come to fruition and probably grow in ways you never imagined, speak to that.
For sure. We feel incredibly fortunate to be in the spot we're in. We're only 4 years old, and I guess we'll be 5 this April. And we are far and away the biggest cap intro platform in the world right now. When we started, the conferences have done so incredibly well that it's sort of, it dominates the fact that we actually are a tech company at the core of this. And we started as a tech company. What created iConnections really was the need in the midst of the pandemic for LPs and GPs to connect electronically because they couldn't get together in person anymore. So we've really built on that platform. And even though the events are what we're known for primarily, you can't run events at this scale without the tech that sits at the center of them. And we're really excited to be pushing the boundaries of what the tech can do. So we started purely as a cap intro platform, but over the last year, we've added a whole set of new features that ultimately will result in us being, we believe, the dominant alternatives investment platform. So we now have a roadshow module, which funds and LPs can use when they're traveling around the world, trying to meet each other, set those up in advance. If they're going to another conference, they can use that module to set up meetings around that conference. We have an investor portal that allows all the people who come into these meetings and meet with each other. We did probably 25,000 meetings this year alone across everything we've touched. That investor portal enables the LPs and GPs to stay connected really in perpetuity. As long as they're members of the platform, that's one of the features that comes with it. We're also rolling out later this month automated subdocs, which will also connect to external KYC systems so that LPs can subscribe to a fund directly through the system. Funds can load their subdocs in, digitize them, and just eliminate the PDFs that are being emailed, basically. It's kind of crazy. We are in the middle of an industry that's running $15-16 trillion, and so much of those flows are transacted through PDFs and email. We did a survey a couple years ago which prompted us to kind of go in this direction, and I believe it was 78% of funds who responded. And it was a meaningful survey. I want to say, what was it, about 350
just over
funds
300.
that we asked? 78% of funds said they didn't have any electronic system to facilitate the subdoc process. They were all doing it through PDFs and email. Like, it's crazy to think how this industry is behind so much technological innovation, but yet it's not really using and getting the benefit of a lot of those innovations. So we think, given the fact that we have captured a huge percentage of the alt industry in our system for these events, we just want to keep bringing them more and more capabilities to help both GPs and LPs advance their businesses. That's the basis.
So, Ron, you just mentioned that you're going to become the dominant platform if you're not already. And I remember going back 20 years ago, I was at a multi-strat fund. We were small, and I remember what it was like raising capital. You're hitting up all your prime brokers, right? The cap intro stuff. It wasn't particularly a high hit rate. We spent a lot of time in London. We had folks from Switzerland coming over. It was a real process, and it took a long time. Give us a sense of like how you've streamlined these processes. You mentioned the events. You mentioned how many meetings that you have, but once you have that networking aspect, once you kind of match LPs with GPs, what happens there? Because I assume the tech platform is a really big part of it. You just mentioned a bunch of other things that a lot of these clients are able to utilize, and you keep launching new products and services. But how does it go from there once the folks leave Global Alts in Miami, and then how does the transactions happen?
Yep. So this is very much a long haul business. This is not. This isn't stuff that people buy quickly. I mean, of course, the biggest funds in the world, they'll come to one of our events and they may get tickets 2 quarters, 3 quarters later. But I'd say that's the exception, not the rule. This is a business where if you're a fund manager and you want to succeed in the asset management world, you have to be in it for the long haul. And what we're trying to do with our platform is keep LPs in particular in the system and connected to the system as much and as often as possible, because we know that even when they come and they have meetings at our events and they may come and do 20, 30 meetings, that's great. It's very likely that it'll be a period of years before they cut a check to any of the people they met. So our job, as we see it, is to try and keep those two communities as connected as possible. And frankly, the roadshow module, we believe, is going to be one of the keys to doing that. Making it possible for LPs and GPs to both use that whenever they're traveling around the world, it just helps facilitate creating more meetings throughout the year, and also enabling them to go into the system and see, wait a second, I met this fund. I remember they said they were from London. I met them 2 years ago at Global Alts. Who was that again? You can go right into the system, see your whole history. Oh, yeah, that was the guy. Let me send them a meeting request, send them the roadshow details so they can see, I'm going to be in town in 2 months. Let's get a meeting confirmed. It's doing things like that, just putting ourselves always in the seat of both parties, the GPs and LPs, and trying to give them features and just platform access that will help make their jobs easier, help them stay connected as much as possible. We think that's a huge element. And then if we do that well, the transactional piece isn't really that hard. That piece should really take care of itself.
A lot of moving parts. We've gotten to know so many members of the senior team and a lot of members of just the on-the-ground team as well. But I would submit, and you don't have to respond to this, Ron, but one of the most critical hires you made was Kaitlin, without question. And if you think about
this is true, guy.
Well, it is true.
And not just because she's in the studio.
Well, no, because I know the impact it had and the necessity to hire the right person at the point you were at. And now you think about the growth over that period of time. Being chief operating officer of this group, I mean, that's a big job. So speak to your, not that there's a typical day, but your team and sort of what your focus has been over the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, it's certainly been a busy couple of years, but I think I have the benefits of coming from marketing at a fund and someone who went to these conferences. So what's now fun is that we're building a business to find solutions, like Ron said, for these types of challenges. But I lived them firsthand. I know how annoying it is when you go to plan a roadshow and you're trying to look up, where's this in Michigan and how do I get to Detroit and how many cars am I taking? So when we're solving for that, it's fun to build that. And part of the hat I wear is the product hat, where we're thinking through those software solutions. We want things to not just work, but we also want them to look beautiful for people that are using them. We're in the modern day era of apps that we're used to that are really functional. So that's a big part of it. And then, of course, the other big piece is Miami and global alts and running these events. We've seen the event close to probably, triple in size, I'd say, since the first year. Our staff has tripled in size since the first year. So we're growing as well, and just being a part of helping to build that out and really building the brand and the reputation that we now have across the entire spectrum of the industry, not just hedge, not just illiquid strategies. It's been really fun.
Yeah, give us a sense, because I'm looking at the website here and we are privy to some of the speakers, and these are all public here, but like Howard Marks, Steve Cohen, Todd Bowley, David Rubenstein, these are all people that are actually on stage speaking to these thousands of folks that are there to do all of the important stuff, which is the meetings. And so where have you guys seen a lot of the growth? Because I just mentioned those guys, and they manage, lots, that probably among them, maybe $1 trillion,
probably
Carlisle a little differently, because that's kind of, where have you guys seen a lot of growth? Because you started this thing a few years, obviously 4 years ago. It was like kind of a lot of multi-strats, but now it's like private credit. It's like, who are some of the guys?
I would say the private market side of the business has grown really nicely. And I think that's happened because cap intro isn't a natural part of the private markets ecosystem. In hedge funds, the prime brokers created, cap intro years and years ago when they realized, hey, it's in our interest to help our fund clients raise money. That's more trading revenue to the bank. So they created that feature, if you will, to the prime brokerage business. And then in order to be competitive in that world, everyone had to have cap intro. So when we entered the business initially, hedge funds were 100% of the funds in attendance. And this is going back to, when I first started in this business 10 years ago. But now we've really penetrated private markets. We're getting hundreds of private equity, private credit, real estate, venture funds. In combination, that'll make up probably 400 to 500 funds in the event this year. So they generally come to the event and it's oh my God, I didn't know this was a thing. They're doing small versions of it in like little pockets around the country, but nothing even close to the scale of what we're doing at Global Alts. So we're definitely spending a lot of time trying to further educate that market and just get exposure there. Venture, we're constantly trying to penetrate the venture market. It's tough because they raise money, in episodically, I guess you could say. But yeah, overall, I'd say private markets is super exciting for us. And also, I think it's about to become one of the most exciting periods in fundraising for private markets, maybe for everyone, but definitely I think for private markets, because I think there's so much optimism about 25. Hopefully, knock on wood, the IPO market starts to open up. And when that happens, there are a lot of LPs who have been putting pressure on their fund managers to not go raise that next fund just yet, because the LPs are really in need of exits in order to fund those future capital calls. So an IPO market or an M&A boom, combination of both, hopefully, will start to really loosen things up. And I think because we have been in one of the toughest fundraising periods in the last 2 or 3 years.
I was going to say that about venture, because everyone I talk to, they think 2025 is going to be a bonanza. There was a lot of capital that was raised in 21, but there was also a cycle pre-COVID where, there was a lot of investment. Now the focus on generative AI in the private markets is so massive. And look at some of the rounds that we've seen, some of these companies, OpenAI is raising at $150 billion. And so I just think that once that capital is returned through exits, there's going to be a bonanza VC, and it sounds like you're just kind of scratching the surface on that area.
I think so. I also think with the new administration coming in, it's just going to mix things up in DC. I think we're going to see certainly, if they live up to half of the promises that are being made, I think the regulatory infrastructure will shrink. I think that's probably going to be good for deals for sure. I think a change at the FTC, I have to believe, will result in more M&A activity than we've seen under the Biden administration. So, hopefully the combination of these things will really, kind of unleash the markets, and it'll be a nice fundraising explosion.
Right, Ron, feel free to add to this answer that Kaitlin gives, but the conference in Miami's Monday the 27th of January through the 30th, which is Thursday. There are going to be north of 5,000 people there. You have some of the numbers. Now, I've been to dozens of conferences over my life. A lot of times these are just, you go for fun, you're hanging out, you meet some people. This conference is a lot of fun, without question. There's some great things to do, but I've used the word, I'll use it again, it's extraordinarily transactional, and things get done. So speak to that, what you've seen prior and what you expect at the end of January.
Yeah, so last year, for those that don't know, the way that we run the conference, I think in and of itself is a little unique. Most conferences you go to, you can pop in, hear some speakers, maybe you're networking, trying to catch someone at the coffee bar. We do it completely differently. One day entirely dedicated to content. So you'll see all of the speakers. We'll have 4 stages this year. But that's it. That's the day that you get to hear from amazing names that Dan mentioned. After that, the next 2 days, solely one-to-one meetings. And that's where the software really comes into play, because you're not trying to book meetings once you show up. You show up knowing exactly what your schedule is. The software, the platform, you're doing all of the searching. If you're a fund or an allocator, you're confirming the meetings in advance so that when you show up, you know exactly where you're going and you have a pretty much full schedule if you do it right. That's where it's unique. Last year we had just over 15,000 meetings. I think we'll probably track close to hopefully 17,000 this year, if not more. That's when, you hear that reputation of it being highly productive. And it's down to the wire. Like, we calculate your walking distance. We're moving this year to the convention center. Part of that is because the event continued to grow, and navigating walking from one hotel to another, as you can imagine, gets complicated. But I think people really value that we're thinking of every little detail to make sure that you're not just meeting people saying hello. It's actually a value add conversation, and also why a lot of the portfolio managers are down there too. So
Ron, dollars and cents now, you want to get granular in terms of, I know last year you probably got it down to the dollar, how many transactions were done in terms of, but how many dollars are there in the first place, those types of things, because I think people will be shocked by the magnitude of the numbers.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty staggering. I mean, obviously they're skewed by some of the huge firms that'll attend, like a Blackstone or a Carlyle or BlackRock. But we have generally somewhere between 20 and 30 trillion represented in the room.
20 and 30 trillion dollars.
Yes, managed collectively by the attendees in the building. We are super excited, by the way, about a partnership that we're just launching this year with the Managed Funds Association, which is adding even more to that number, because the Managed Funds Association is really the largest trade association in the alts industry. And they have as their members some of the biggest funds in the world, Citadel, Two Sigma, the really the largest and for sure some of the most sophisticated. In our partnership with MFA, they are bringing, they had a competing event in essence. I mean, we never really saw each other as competitors because we're running a software business and an event business. They're a trade association. But nonetheless, our events overlapped on the same days. So we approached them. I had several conversations with Brian Corbett, the CEO of MFA, who's a fabulous guy. And we agreed it just didn't make sense to do this separately. So we combined forces, and that is working out incredibly well. Now the event is really today an index of the whole alts industry. We have small funds that are 50 million, 100 million in AUM, and we have the biggest fund managers in the world who are MFA members and board members there. So we're really excited about that addition to this, because now it's also made it much less complex, because it is fun. You're right. It's a fun place to be. Miami in January, never the worst. But this is like serious hard work.
Yes, it is.
You come down to an event, you do a day of content spread across 4 stages, you're bopping all over the place. That's the easy day. The next 2 days where you're cranking through 20 meetings, 30 meetings. I mean, some LPs are now sending entire teams, and each person on that team is doing 20, 25 meetings. Companies are collectively putting out, 100, 150 meetings. We've never seen like these levels before. So we think putting it all in one building, not having two schedules, not having people running from one event to another, which was happening, it's just streamlining the whole experience, and we couldn't be more excited about it.
It's interesting. I love seeing you guys on like day 3 because a lot of folks are ready to kind of blow off some steam at the end of some of these long days. You guys are still working, and you guys have been working for months ahead of time, so it must be absolutely exhausting. I hope you guys get to decompress at some point in February. But one of the things that Guy and I have always found really interesting about these events, I think the first one we did with you guys was your crypto event. And it was in Miami. And it was amazing. And I remember us talking ahead of time. Bitcoin had been cut in half. Mm-hmm. And we were like, might this be a dicey period? And when we got on the ground and we were doing some of the stuff on stage, but we met a lot of people, the level of optimism there, it actually shocked us because Wall Street was super bearish, but then you get to, and the media was really bearish, and then you get there and you meet the people that are heads down, they are building, they're also investing. We walked away being like, oh my goodness, it doesn't feel nearly as bad as what we hear on CNBC. And then we've also found that, in 2022, because the market had a really tough year, there was a lot of bearishness about a lot of the asset classes that you just mentioned. And then in 2023, there was a lot of skepticism as the market was taking off. But so I find the sentiment really interesting. And I also find that amongst a lot of the participants there, they're getting a read on their markets. They're getting a read on other markets. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I know you spend a lot of time with these market participants.
Yeah, so digital assets is super interesting. It gets dissed all the time in a million different ways. And then everyone shows up and takes meetings with these funds. The first year, that digital asset event that we did together.
That was the bottom, by the way.
Right, it was the bottom. Yeah. And I think that was 22, right? That was June of 22. Yeah. The Miami in January of 22, we had 17 digital asset funds in that event who got 800 meetings combined. We had never seen anything like that, such a small percentage of funds in this little category that everyone made fun of, got 800 meetings. So clearly, the institutional investors were using those meetings to come up to speed and get educated. Unfortunately, we don't see what the flows are after the event. We're working on ways, we can do that. But obviously that's an amazing sign when you're getting that volume of activity. This year, we have 47 digital asset funds. So my sense is digital assets has done a pretty amazing job of navigating one of the worst bear markets I've ever seen in a category.
How much market cap has been gained since mid-2022. I think $1.5 trillion or so just in Bitcoin. You know what I mean? So again, a lot of those funds. What I find interesting about digital assets and your events called Global Alts, it is like the epicenter of of an alternative investment. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many folks are interested in look at the alpha that is being created. But when you think about innovation, this is where the most innovation, I think we'll look back and say, so this ecosystem was really interesting. Do you get a read on that? Because you said you just, doubled or tripled the amount of digital asset funds that are there. Do you get a read on from some of these traditional managers? BlackRock, they launched an ETF. They're going to be there. What do you expect for that? Is that going to be one of the biggest growth areas? Private credit has been huge, but is this one going forward?
We just opened the scheduling system a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. So there's not enough activity in there yet to really know, if there's a trend to be seen. In another 2 weeks, managers actually just got access today. LPs got access 2 weeks ago. In another 2 weeks, I'll be able to give you a sense as to where the meetings are going. But my guess is we're going to see a really nice uptick in digital assets. They did okay in January of 24, but just based on the signups we're seeing, sponsorship inquiries, things like that, I think we're going to see a really nice uptick. And I think there's clearly more optimism. Again, going back to, my comments on the regulatory infrastructure, I think the Trump administration is very clearly headed towards embracing it in a way the Biden administration didn't. So that has to be good for these guys.
Kaitlin, I'm going to tee you up a little bit, but I know your ability to answer this question, I know, is right there for you. So the amount of success stories that you've seen, the anecdotal feedback you get from funds and allocators that have gone to the conferences, that's truly where I think you feel like, we're making a difference here. So speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely true. We have our sales team, our account management team, the investor relations team. They're the ones that are boots on the ground, firsthand hearing feedback. And I think what's really exciting is that people actually want to tell us, hey, I've been going to your event for 3 years and I've raised this much money and I'm telling you about it, right? They want to share. They see the value in what they're doing. And that comes in, of course, in the weeks coming after and leading up to Miami, but year round as well when we're having these conversations. So that's, to me, what's really exciting is just seeing that come in. I think, we don't have a formal way yet to track this. We're on our way, but informally, we're close to, and Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, but just over 1.05 billion in total assets raised.
Yep,
from
that's right.
Just what we've heard.
And that's from a very small sample, because the vast majority of fund managers and LPs, of course, they come to the event, great. They go back, they're running their businesses, they're busy people. We don't want to bother them, so we're not kind of on top of everyone trying to collect this data. We're working on ways to kind of automate that process, but I can tell you some of the numbers are just staggering. We had one large fund of funds last year tell us they allocated $500 million. This was actually 2 Miamis ago, so January of 23. We frequently get updates from funds who tell us they got a $20 million ticket, a $50 million ticket, a $100 million ticket. So we know our estimate, if we take that sample and try and apply it in a probably less scientific way than we should, but if you apply it to the overall event, we are guessing there's a pretty strong case that north of 10 billion is probably changing hands following an event the scale of
I think
Miami.
that's probably fair. And, you're building this conference out, but you're not building it with new additions. You're building it off a strong base. My sense is the retention rate for people that have come since inception is probably north of 95. That's a guess, but I'm probably right.
Yeah, the retention rate is very high. It's also correlated to how the fund is performing. If a fund isn't performing well and they don't think they'll be successful in a marketing effort, they may skip a year. But we analyzed this data this year pretty intensely, and we found that 63% of funds who have at least one meeting come back. So that's a pretty good renewal rate off of someone who, we would view one meeting as pretty
a failure.
Right, that's a total failure. When you get into the meeting averages, which are more like 17, 18 per fund, the renewal rates are deep into the 80s. So it's, it just works. It's working for both the LPs and the GPs. And I think as long as we keep making sure that they have a great experience and we help streamline what they do at the event, what they do after the event, it'll continue to succeed.
We also, to add to that too, just using Asia as a recent example, we surveyed the allocators on site in Singapore just, 3 weeks ago. And of those, it's actually, like I said, it doubled in size in the last year. So 40% of the people there were recurring attendees who had been before. We asked them if they had allocated to a manager that they met at a global alts conference. 78% of them said yes, that they had. So a huge percentage, which I think speaks to not just the size of the tickets, but the number of allocations across all of the attendees that are going.
Yeah, it's really a testament, I think, to our IR team. So their job is to meet allocators, vet them. We have to make sure everyone is accredited or qualified purchaser, or you're not allowed in the room. And we want investors who are active. We don't want you could be accredited but not really doing much with your portfolio. We're really only allowing investors into the event who want to be in that room. They want to take meetings because they're looking for new things to add to their portfolio. That's a really important element.
So you've been to Asia. You're obviously here in the United States. You've been in the Middle East. Any growth in potentially the continent of Africa or Europe in general? What's next?
So we're actually the next event in terms of calendar is actually next week, believe it or not. We're partnered with ADGM for Abu Dhabi Finance Week, where we are running a small cap intro element inside of Abu Dhabi Finance Week. So we're very excited about that. That's a new partnership for us, but we've gotten to know the ADGM team over the last, probably 18 months, and they're amazing people. What's happening in the Middle East, the growth in the Middle East is just incredible. They are doing a phenomenal job of attracting funds into the region, and not just the way I'd say it was done, 10 years ago. You'd fly in, you'd visit, you do a bunch of meetings, and you leave. That's not how it's happening anymore. In the Middle East now, funds are opening offices in Abu Dhabi, in ADGM, and really building teams in that part of the world, not just for the purpose of raising money from that region, but for also deploying money into that region. And we've seen really throughout the GCC countries, they want partners, not just funds who they have trillions of dollars. It's an incredibly wealthy part of the world, and they need places to put that money. But they really want partners who will see funds really flow in both directions, both into fund vehicles that get invested around the world, and also fund vehicles that'll look to do investments in the region. We're also looking at Europe. Europe is interesting. It's whenever we survey fund managers, overwhelming support for an event in Europe. Not always as much support from the LPs. I think the LPs in Europe like to travel, because whenever we ask them, they just generally seem less excited about it. So we're trying to figure that one out, but we would definitely like to do something in Europe. Our hope would be we have ultimately 3 Miami scale events. A 5,000 to 6,000 person event every year in Miami, a 5,000 to 6,000 person event in Asia, and a 5 to 6 in Europe. I think that would be kind of the pinnacle of the business for us.
It's funny. I talked about sentiment a little bit. I think this year is going to be really special when you think about it starts a week after inauguration. Some of the things that you just mentioned about regulatory environment, and think about some of these kind of captains of industry that are there going to be speaking, but also making their rounds in the meetings and some of them got pretty vocal about some of those regulatory sort of stuff. So to me, I think some of the content, especially when you consider some of the folks that have been nominated on the economic team and the like. There's going to be a lot of optimism, so I'm excited about that. This is just Guy and me as kind of dumb content guys. We go down there and, we're just doing some podcasting, some TV and all that sort of stuff.
A little stage work, perhaps.
So for us, it's always really fun to speak to a lot of these people, off the record, but also have them on the TV and the podcast mic. So, Guy, what are you most excited about?
No, it's just, you always come away, you learn a lot when you're down there. We're down there for probably 2.5 days or so. You meet people that you might not have met, or catching up with people that you may have worked with many years ago, but you always walk away with sort of a renewed understanding of where people's investment dollars are going and what people are thinking about. So we get sort of outside our just looking at the S&P and individual stocks bubble, and we can sort of broaden it out over a 2.5, 3-day period. And I always walk away, I think, a little smarter. Low bar for me, I know, but definitely a little bit smarter.
Well, you might get smarter, Guy, but I'm already there. No, it's exciting, and you guys have been great partners of ours, and it's been fun to watch this business grow the way it has. And I just can't believe. I mean, the first time we were there, we were at the one hotel. It was, the digital assets one. You take it over to the, global alts, and there's thousands of people there. Now you guys have gotten so big, you had to move to the convention center in Miami. So really exciting stuff. We really appreciate you guys coming here. Again, we appreciate the partnership, and Kaitlin, you've become one heck of a podcaster here. So we appreciate your contribution around. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. It's always fun to be with you. And remember, we have a podcast studio set up in Miami. So feel free to come down and do some interviews.
Little housekeeping real quickly before we get out of here. So you just mentioned you opened up some of the bookings, the meetings sort of thing. When does registration end, and what sort of capacity do you guys have?
Great point. So we're closing registration across the board for LPs and GPs on December 20th this year. And that's really to give our teams time to get all the meetings confirmed, get schedules, solidified, and get ready to go in and just throw a great event.
Ron, Kaitlin, always great to see you both. Thanks for coming to the studio. Thanks for your partnership. Thanks for your friendship. We look forward to seeing you at the end of January.
Same here. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.